Hi, I am Sophia. Welcome to True Payback, where story hits different. Hit subscribe. Let's dive in.
There is a specific kind of laughter that I have been hearing my entire life. Not the loose, generous kind that happens when something is genuinely funny. Not even the nervous kind that happens when people don't know what else to do. The kind I mean is tighter than both of those. It has a target. You can hear the target in it, a small compression in the sound like a fist closing. My family had been making that sound since I was 12 years old, and by the time I was 29 and watching my cousin Brianna hold my crutches above her head at my brother's wedding reception, I knew the sound so well I could have picked it out of a stadium. What I could not have predicted was Dr. Price. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The thing about stories like this is that the reception is not where they begin. They begin years earlier, in the ordinary accumulation of moments that nobody writes down because they each seem too small to matter. It is only when you line them up end to end that you see the shape of what was built. My name is Nadia. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the second of 3 children. My brother Ryan is 3 years older. My sister Courtney is 4 years younger. My parents, my father Carl, who sold commercial insurance, and my mother Deb, who managed the office of a pediatric dental practice, were not cruel people in the ways that are easy to name. They did not shout. They did not hit. They kept the house clean and the refrigerator stocked, and they came to school events and remembered birthdays. What they were, instead, was a family that had organized itself around a particular story. Ryan was the capable one. Courtney was the spirited one. And I was the complicated one. The one whose needs required management, whose health required accommodation, whose presence at family events came with what my mother called, in a phrase I heard so many times it lost its shape, a whole production. The production had a beginning. When I was 15, I was in a car accident. A rear-end collision at a stoplight. Nothing cinematic. Another driver running a yellow at 35 miles an hour into the back of my mother's station wagon. I was in the back seat. The whiplash was significant. The spinal injury that emerged over the following weeks, as the inflammation clarified into something the doctors could see on imaging, was more significant. I had a herniated disc at L4-L5 and what the orthopedic specialist at the time described as moderate nerve involvement affecting my left leg. With physical therapy and careful management, he said the prognosis was reasonable. It would not be easy. It would require sustained attention. But I was 15 and otherwise healthy, and there was real cause for optimism. What the specialist could not account for was how my family would metabolize the information. My father's response was practical and immediate. He handled the insurance claim with the other driver's company and established the medical payment structure within 2 weeks. He was good at logistics. He was less good at the part that came after logistics, the part where a 15-year-old needed someone to sit with the fact that her body had changed and might not fully change back. My mother's response evolved over time in a direction I didn't fully understand until I was much older. In the first months, she was attentive, driving me to appointments, managing the PT schedule, doing the things that needed doing. But as the months stretched into a year and then 2 years, and as it became clear that my recovery was going to be partial rather than complete, something in her attention shifted from care to impatience. Not impatience at the situation. Impatience at me, at the persistence of my limitation, as though my body were being uncooperative in a way that reflected some failure of effort or will. "You'd heal faster if you pushed through more," she said once when I was 17 and still using a cane on hard days. She said it not unkindly, that was the thing. She said it the way you say something you genuinely believe is helpful. I did not push through more. My physical therapist, a careful woman named Jean who had worked with spinal injury patients for 20 years, had been explicit with me about the difference between productive discomfort and damaging overextension. I listened to Jean. My mother interpreted my listening to Jean as stubbornness. Ryan, by this point, had developed a style of relating to my injury that I would eventually come to understand as self-protective. He was the older sibling, the established one, the one whose identity in the family was built on competence and ease. My injury and its ongoing requirements functioned in the family ecosystem as a kind of gravity. It pulled attention, rerouted plans, altered the family's center of balance. Ryan's response to this gravity was to make jokes about it. Small ones mostly. Nothing that could be directly confronted. "Here comes the production," he'd say quietly when I was gathering my things to leave somewhere. "The cane cometh," once when I appeared at a family barbecue. He always said these things with a grin that gave him plausible deniability, Just teasing, lighten up, you're so sensitive. Courtney was too young at the time of the accident to have built an independent response. She absorbed the family's framework instead. By the time she was old enough to have opinions of her own, those opinions had already been shaped by years of watching Ryan get laughs and my mother sigh and my father stay quiet. And her operating assumption was that my injury was, at some level, a choice I was making about how to move through the world. Our cousin Brianna, my father's brother's daughter, 2 years older than Ryan, who had grown up in the same extended family with the same ambient understanding of who I was and what I represented, was simply the cousin who had always made the jokes slightly louder than Ryan did. She had the quality of someone who identifies the cruelest available option in any given moment and reaches for it with a cheerfulness that makes cruelty look like personality. I am trying to explain why they were the way they were because I think the explanation matters. My family was not a collection of villains. They were people who had decided collectively and without ever fully articulating it, that my injury was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a reality to be understood, and that the most efficient way to manage it was to treat it as something slightly less real than I said it was. This decision served them. Kept the family story clean. It meant they didn't have to feel guilty about the barbecues I left early or the trips I didn't take or the decade of appointments I navigated largely without them. I am also trying to explain it because understanding it is what made it possible for me to survive them. I had built a life by 29 that I was genuinely proud of. I worked as a medical illustrator for a regional hospital system, a career I had arrived at through an undergraduate degree in biology, a graduate certificate in scientific illustration, and a dogged interest in the place where visual precision and medical communication overlapped. My work appeared in surgical training materials and patient education resources and, twice, in peer-reviewed publications. My manager, a woman named Sonia who had hired me 4 years earlier and had the gift of leaving talented people alone to do their work, had told me at my last review that I was the best visual communicator on the team. I had a studio apartment with north-facing light that I had arranged with the specific pleasure of someone who lives alone and can make every spatial decision without compromise. I had a best friend named Theo whom I had met in graduate school who was a physical therapist, which meant he was one of the few people in my life who understood my injury from the inside out and never once suggested I was making it up. I had a cat named Gerald who had no respect for my medical equipment and had knocked my crutches over approximately 400 times. I had Dr. Price. Dr. Marcus Price had become my orthopedic surgeon 18 months before Ryan's wedding, when an MRI had revealed that the L4-L5 disc, which had been managed conservatively for over a decade, had progressed to a point where surgery was the appropriate next step. The procedure, a microdiscectomy with stabilization, had been, by the metrics that matter, successful. The nerve involvement in my left leg had improved significantly post-surgery. The recovery was real and documented and ongoing. The crutches I used now were not the same crutches I had used at 17. They were forearm crutches, prescribed during the post-surgical recovery period, used on days when my left leg stability was reduced, during fatigue after extended walking at events where I would be on my feet for hours. Dr. Price had been specific and clear in his postoperative care instructions. The crutches were not optional equipment on days when I needed them. Using them on those days was the difference between protecting the surgical repair and potentially undoing it. He had said this to me. He had written it in my discharge instructions. I had the document. Ryan met his wife, Melissa, at a work conference 4 years earlier. Melissa was warm and organized and seemed to genuinely like Ryan in a way that I found, honestly, somewhat mysterious given that I had grown up with him, but which I was happy to take as evidence that people are different with different people. She had been kind to me at every family event. Not performatively kind, just normally, unremarkably kind in the way of someone who had not been taught to treat me as a production. When Ryan called to tell me I'd been asked to be a bridesmaid, I was surprised. We were not close. We had never been close, not really, not since the accident had installed me in the family taxonomy as the complicated one and him as the capable one. But Melissa had apparently asked specifically and Ryan had agreed, and the call was the most straightforward conversation I'd had with my brother in years. Melissa wants everyone there, he said. And she wants it to actually feel like family. Hey, I said. You'll need to wear the dress, he said. And, look, I just need to know in advance if there are going to be any. I'll manage it, I said. I'm not going to make it a production. There was the word. I heard him receive it. There was a pause. That's not what I meant, he said in a tone that suggested it was exactly what he meant, but he appreciated that I had given him the exit. I agreed to be a bridesmaid. I bought the dress. Dusty rose, A-line floor length, which worked well because floor length meant no one spent the ceremony looking at my leg. I attended the fittings. I participated in the bachelorette weekend in Nashville, which Theo helped me plan logistics for so I could participate fully without destroying myself, because Theo understood that I wanted to be there fully, not in a reduced version that made everyone else comfortable. I told no one in my family that Dr. Price was attending the wedding. This requires explanation. Dr. Price was not attending as my doctor. He was attending as the +1 of Melissa's college roommate, Dana, a woman Dr. Price had been dating for 7 months, a fact I was aware of because Dana had mentioned it at a pre-wedding dinner, and I had gone very still for a moment and then said, "Oh, how funny, Dr. Price is my surgeon," and Dana had said, "Oh, Marcus will love that," and the connection was made. I had texted Dr. Price afterward. We communicated occasionally about my recovery, nothing unusual, and mentioned that it seemed we would be at the same wedding. He had replied, "Small world. How's the left leg holding up with the event prep?" I had told him honestly, variable. He had said, "Use the crutches when you need them." I had said, "I know." He had said, "I know you know. Use them anyway." I had brought the crutches to the wedding. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock in a renovated event space downtown. Exposed brick, tall windows, the kind of venue that photographs beautifully and is slightly cold in October if you are standing still for 45 minutes. I stood with the other bridesmaids. My left leg was manageable during the ceremony, which was 38 minutes. I used the crutches walking in and left them against the wall during the vows, standing on my own for the brief period that required, and then retrieved them for the recessional. My mother saw me pick them up and made a face that she arranged into a smile before anyone else saw it. I know this because I was watching for it. After 14 years, I watched for it automatically, the way you check a weather app before leaving the house. Not because you want it to rain, but because you want to be prepared. The reception was in the same building, a larger room on the upper floor. The cocktail hour was fine. I sat when I needed to sit, stood when I wanted to stand, and used the crutches for transitions. Melissa found me at the cocktail hour and hugged me and said, "You look beautiful and I'm so glad you're here," with the specific directness of someone who meant both things fully. Ryan found me 20 minutes later and said, "The dress looks great." It was the most uncomplicated compliment my brother had given me in a decade, and I received it as evidence that Melissa had done something to him, some slow and patient renovation of certain rooms, and that this renovation was ongoing and possibly real. We were seated for dinner. I was at a table with my parents, Courtney, Brianna, and several cousins from my father's side. The family table positioned near the center of the room. Dr. Price and Dana were at table 3, the groom's party table, which was 2 tables to our left and slightly behind. Dinner was uneventful. The food was good. My father told a story about a fishing trip that everyone had heard before and laughed at anyway. My mother asked Courtney about her new apartment. Brianna talked about a cruise she was planning. I talked to my cousin Patrick, who was recently engaged and wanted to ask me about venues. And the conversation was the pleasantly ordinary kind that I was perfectly capable of having when not being managed by the people at the table. It was after the first round of dancing when things shifted. I had not danced. I don't dance at events where I'm using the crutches, not because I'm incapable of any movement, but because the calculus of what it costs my body versus what it produces socially is one I make deliberately, and that evening the calculus came out clearly on the side of not dancing. I had been on my feet more than usual across the day. My left leg was logging the cumulative effort. I was at the table watching the floor, nursing a glass of wine, when I became aware that Brianna was talking. She was talking to Courtney and 2 of my father's nieces, a separate conversation from the one I was in, and I wasn't paying attention to the content until I heard the register of the sound. The register was the one I knew. The tight, target-containing kind. "Just for a minute," Brianna was saying, "just to see what she does." I turned. Brianna's eyes met mine and she smiled the smile that I had seen her use my entire life. The smile that says I'm about to do something and we both know it and there's nothing you're going to do about it. And she reached over and picked up my crutches from where they leaned against my chair. She stood. She backed up 3 steps. She held them above her head. "Walk to them," she said, "if you need them so bad." The table laughed. Not everyone. Patrick did not laugh and I registered that. My father looked at his drink. But the core of it, Brianna, Courtney, two cousins, laughed the laugh I had been hearing since I was 15, and the room felt suddenly very bright and very small. I stood. I do not fully know what I intended when I stood. I think some part of me simply rejected the alternative, which was to sit and wait and ask nicely, and that rejection was older and more physical than any decision I made consciously. I stood and I took one step, and my left leg, which had been managing a full day of wedding events, which had been compensating since the cocktail hour, which had been sending me signals for the past 90 minutes that I had been overriding with will, my left leg buckled. I went down. Not a stumble. Not a catch yourself. The floor came up and I went down hard on my left side, and I heard the impact before I felt it, which is the particular physics of a fall. Sound first, pain arriving a beat behind like news from a distance. There was a half-second of absolute silence. Then Brianna laughed. It was a shorter laugh than the others. A startled laugh, reflexive, the kind that happens before the brain catches up with the situation. But it was a laugh. Courtney made a sound and stopped. My mother said, "Nadia," in a voice that had concern and something else in it, something that sounded like embarrassment at my behalf. Dr. Price was already on his feet. I know the reconstruction of this from two sources. My own partial awareness from the floor and Theo's account afterward, because Theo was seated at an adjacent table and saw everything. According to Theo, Dr. Price was standing before I finished going down. He crossed the distance from table 3 to our table in approximately 8 seconds. Dana was behind him. He took the crutches from Brianna's hands. He did not ask for them. He did not say, "Excuse me," or "Could you please?" He took them with the specific authority of a person who has decided that whatever social protocols apply in this situation are subordinate to what needs to happen next. And Brianna's hands dropped because the authority was physical as much as anything, and she wasn't expecting it. He crouched beside me. "Nadia. Don't move yet. Tell me where." "Left hip," I said. "And my back." He did the brief, practiced assessment. Not a full examination, a field triage. Hands on my hip, asking about sensation, asking about movement, asking about pain on a scale. His voice was the same voice he used in the office. Not warm exactly, not cold, just entirely focused, like the rest of the room didn't exist while he was asking me questions. "Can you sit up?" "Yes." He helped me to sitting. Then carefully to standing. He placed the crutches in my hands. Then he turned to face the table. The room in the vicinity of our tables was absolutely quiet. The band was playing at the far end of the room. Here near the center, every conversation had stopped. I was aware of Ryan on the dance floor, turned, reading the scene. I was aware of Melissa beside him, her hand on his arm. I was aware of my father still looking at his drink, not looking up. Dr. Price looked at Brianna. He looked at Courtney. He looked at the table as a whole. "I'm Dr. Marcus Price," he said. "I'm Nadia's orthopedic surgeon. I performed a spinal repair on her 18 months ago." He paused. "That fall, the one you just laughed at, was a fall onto a recently repaired spine. I don't yet know whether she's sustained a setback. We're going to find out. What I need you to understand right now is what those crutches are for." He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, not for a phone, just the gesture of a man who keeps things where he can find them, and produced a business card which he set on the table in front of Brianna. "Those crutches are prescribed post-surgical equipment for a patient recovering from a procedure that I consider one of the more technically demanding I've performed in the past 2 years. She uses them on high-activity days because her spinal repair requires protected loading during recovery. Removing them from a patient in this condition for any reason is not a prank. It is the removal of prescribed medical equipment from a disabled person." He looked at Brianna directly. "That has a legal name. I'd like you to think about that name carefully." Brianna's mouth was open. "The fall she just took," Dr. Price continued, "may be nothing. It may be a bruise and a scare. I will know more after I examine her properly tonight. But if she has sustained damage to the surgical repair, if the work I did 18 months ago has been compromised by this fall, the cause of that damage is documented. It's documented by everyone at this table who watched it happen. It's documented by the people at the surrounding tables who watched it happen." He paused. "It's documented by me." He picked up his card from the table in front of Brianna. He held it for a moment, then set it back down. "Keep that," he said. "In case anyone needs to reach me." He turned back to me. "Can you walk to somewhere quieter?" "Yes," I said. Then let's do that. He examined me in a side corridor off the main reception hall, with Dana standing at the entrance giving us privacy and Theo, who had appeared within 90 seconds of the fall because Theo always appeared, standing beside me and answering questions about what he had observed with the precise language of a physical therapist describing a clinical event. The assessment took 12 minutes. Dr. Price was thorough and unhurried and told me what he was looking for and what he was finding in real time, which was something I had valued about him from our first appointment. He treated me as someone who could handle information about my own body. The hip is bruised, he said. Significantly. You're going to feel that tomorrow. He had me perform several movement tests. He watched my leg carefully. The nerve involvement doesn't seem acutely worse. That's genuinely good news. But I want imaging on Monday. Not optional, Monday. Hey, I said. How long had your leg been signaling before you stood? I thought about it. 90 minutes, approximately. He nodded. He did not say I told you so. He did not say anything that was shaped like a lecture. He said, the signals exist for exactly this reason. Next time, and I know you know this but I'm saying it anyway, next time you feel the signals you don't override them. Regardless of the social situation. The social situation, I said, was someone holding my crutches above their head. I understand that, he said. And I am going to speak to the relevant people about that. But my job right now is your spine, not their behavior. Their behavior is its own problem. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to go back in there, he said, and I'm going to speak to your brother. And then I'm going to speak to whoever needs to be spoken to. You don't need to be present for that unless you want to be. I thought about it. I want to be present. He looked at me for a moment. He said. We went back in. Ryan had come to the corridor entrance twice during the examination and been gently redirected by Theo both times. When we returned to the reception, Ryan was standing near our table with Melissa beside him and an expression on his face that I had not seen in a long time. Not the managed, affable Ryan who made small jokes and avoided gravity, but something underneath that, something younger and less defended. Dr. Price spoke to Ryan first. Not in front of the table. He drew Ryan a few steps away with Melissa and spoke quietly. I could not hear all of it, but I heard the words surgical repair, and prescribed equipment, and legal exposure, and I watched Ryan's face as he heard them. Ryan looked at me. He had the look of a person who has just been given information that reframes a decade of prior information, and who is doing the reframing in real time in public at his own wedding reception, and who does not have the option of leaving to process it privately. It was an uncomfortable look to be on the receiving end of. It was also the most honest look my brother had given me since I was 15 years old. He said, I didn't know it was that serious. It was the second time in my life I had heard those words from a family member. My father had said something nearly identical to my mother at the hospital after the accident 14 years earlier, when he thought I was asleep. I hadn't been asleep. I had heard him, and then I had heard my mother say, she'll be fine, she just needs to stop dwelling. And I had understood from that exchange who I was going to be in my family's story. I know you didn't know, I said to Ryan. You've had 14 years to find out. He didn't have an answer for that. Melissa put her hand on his arm and looked at me with an expression that was not pity. I am careful about the difference, but something more like witness. Like she was seeing something clearly that she had only half seen before, and she was deciding what to do with the seeing. Dr. Price had returned to the table. I don't know exactly what he said to Brianna because I was speaking with Ryan, but I know that by the time I looked over, Brianna was not at the table anymore. She was at the bar on the far side of the room, and she did not return to our table for the remainder of the reception. My father was watching Dr. Price with the expression of a man who has just realized that a situation he thought he had ambient authority over is operating on different rules than he understood. My mother had her hands folded in her lap and was looking at the centerpiece. Theo appeared beside me with a chair and a glass of water. Sit, he said. I know, I said. I'm going to sit next to you and we're going to talk about something entirely different for 20 minutes, he said, because you need your nervous system to get quiet. What are we going to talk about? Gerald knocked over your crutches again this morning. He did it on purpose. I witnessed it. I laughed. It was a real laugh, the loose, generous kind. Theo sat beside me and we talked about Gerald for 20 minutes while the reception continued around us, and it was the most useful 20 minutes of the evening. I went for imaging on Monday. Dr. Price had already called ahead. The radiologist had my history pulled before I arrived. The results came back Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Price called me directly. The repair is intact, he said. There's soft tissue bruising around the surgical site consistent with the fall, and I want to monitor it over the next 2 weeks, but the structural work is holding. I sat with that for a moment. The relief was physical, something that had been tight in my chest since Saturday night releasing in a slow exhale. Hey, I said. You were lucky, he said. I want to be straightforward with you. The outcome of a fall like that onto a recent spinal repair is not predictably fine. You were lucky this time. The next time. I know, I said. I know there can't be a next time. Which means, he said with the careful delivery of someone who has rehearsed this, that the environment that created the conditions for this fall needs to change. That is a medical recommendation, not a personal one. I have documented this incident in your file. If you choose to communicate that documentation to your family, that is your decision. If any member of your family contacts me, I will be direct with them about what the medical record shows. I thought about my mother's folded hands at the reception. My father's expression at the table. Ryan's face when he said he didn't know. I'm going to send Ryan the discharge instructions, I said. The original ones from 18 months ago. That's appropriate, Dr. Price said. And I'm going to stop explaining, I said. I've been explaining for 14 years. I'm done explaining. The documentation explains now. There was a brief pause. That also seems appropriate, he said. I sent Ryan the discharge instructions that evening. 3 pages, clinical language, signed by Dr. Price, specifying the nature of the repair and the conditions for recovery and the explicit instruction regarding ambulatory equipment. I sent them without a cover note. Just the document. Ryan called the next morning. He had read it, he said. He had read it twice. Melissa read it too, he said. She wants to call you. She wants to talk about Thanksgiving, about what that would look like if it was actually okay for you. It would look like everyone understanding what the crutches are for, I said. Yeah, he said. I know that now. I told him I would talk to Melissa. I told him I appreciated the call. I told him that I was not ready to have a full conversation about the last 14 years right now, that I would need time for that, and that I needed him to be patient with the timeline. He said he would be. I have been cautious about believing it. Caution at this point is not cynicism, it is self-preservation built carefully over a long time. But I am also not unwilling to test it. That feels like the most honest position I have. Brianna sent a text 4 days after the wedding. It said, I'm sorry about what happened at the reception. It was a stupid joke. I read it twice looking for the framing that minimized, the passive construction, the, if you were hurt, the, I didn't realize you were that sensitive. The apology was plain. There was no minimizing inside it that I could find. I replied, thank you for saying that. I meant it as far as it went. It didn't go all the way. But it was a beginning of a kind and I was willing to see where beginnings led. My mother called a week later. She did not call to apologize. She called to ask me to coffee, which was her way of approaching something she didn't have direct language for. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment. She ordered her usual, I ordered mine, and we sat across from each other with the particular awkwardness of people who have a great deal to say and have not yet determined how to say it. She said, I looked up the condition. Online, I mean. The disc thing. And the surgery. Hey, I said. I didn't realize, she said. I mean, I knew it was real. I didn't understand what you were managing. All that time. I thought about telling her that I had told her. That I had handed her information in various forms for 14 years and she had declined it. I thought about how many times I had sat in appointments with Dr. Price's predecessors and wished there was someone from my family in the room, not because I needed support, but because I believed that if they saw what I saw, the MRI images, the specialist's careful language, the documented evidence of what my body was navigating, they would finally be unable to maintain the narrative. I thought about all of that and I looked at my mother across the coffee shop table and I said, I know you didn't understand. I need you to understand now. She nodded. Her eyes were wet, which I had not expected, and which made the moment complicated in the way that genuine moments usually are, not clean, not resolved, but real. I'm going to try, she said. I held that. I did not say it was enough. I did not say it was too little. I held it as the thing it was. A late start from a person who had never been given the language in a family that had agreed for a long time not to have it. Trying from my mother was something I had never heard before. I was willing, cautiously and with full awareness of all the ways it might not hold, to see what trying looked like over time. Theo and I had dinner the Friday after the coffee shop meeting. I told him about the conversation with my mother. He listened the way he always listened. Fully, without editing, without offering a conclusion before I had finished drawing one. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I'm standing on something that might hold," I said. "And like I've been wrong about that before." "That's a reasonable place to be," he said. "Dr. Price called it lucky," I said. "The fall." He said I was lucky. "You were." "I know." I looked at my wine. "I've been thinking about what he said at the table. About the legal name. I keep thinking about what would have happened if he hadn't been there." "What would have happened," Theo said, "is what was already happening. Slowly over 14 years. He was right. The reception hadn't created the situation. It had made the situation visible, quickly, in a room full of people, to a surgeon who had the authority and the presence of mind to name it out loud. The situation itself had been building since a rear-end collision at a stoplight when I was 15 years old. Gerald was asleep on my crutches when I got home. He did this periodically, not, I think, out of malice, but because they were warm when I had been using them, and he was a cat with no concept of the difference between medical equipment and a particularly elongated piece of furniture. I moved him carefully. He opened one eye, assessed me and closed it again. I leaned the crutches against the wall where they belonged and went to bed. My spine was still there, repaired and holding, which was not something I took for granted. Some things that have been damaged can be repaired, and the repair can hold if you treat it carefully enough. And the treatment requires patience and the right support and the willingness to use the equipment you've been given, even when someone holds it above their head and tells you to walk. I was getting better at that. Not perfect. Better. That for the time being was enough.